he's coming with another. They started veterans chapter. This is a great magazine. Have you ever seen this? This is just pleasant. But this word I'm trying to. It's the we haven't been doing anything. Veterans for Peace official magazine.
Well, our little action at the airport already made the local news sites register, and I think 13. I saw it on the internet. I didn't. Yeah, I was flipping through the channels for 5 o'clock news, but I hadn't seen it there yet. But I shut it off before the end because I was gonna make my way over to the Wicker House to bum rides.
This is Sherry part of the town. Yeah, something for the 20-degree weather. These are the phone numbers of all of your people.
Ones we like to have some fun with. Oh yeah, we are.
You are. I'm trying to measure up to your standards.
Well, until October 9th of 2011, I wasn't really activist in anything.
Well, 10 years ago I wasn't either. I was an activist for myself.
Yeah.
Period. Being a corporate person.
Yeah. You were making someone else filthy rich.
And I was helping other people get home. That's what I did.
2.5 hours a day.
And I was good at it.
5 hours they drove gas and my bond was like $50. They extradited me on that.
Yeah. Well, rich get richer.
Yeah.
But I would be able to. But I should probably. I would be willing to give it anywhere.
Dr. Gillespie. How are you?
But I'll put it on there right now. Now that I have it, I might as well. in a position.
Yeah.
Yeah, Minnesota.
Great action. Oh,
Well worth it, apparently.
yeah. Here's the good side of there, no, so you say do some good jobs, but other than that, it's not really majority of the press is
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And just what we need, another pipeline burst, this time in Missouri. Well, it happened.
But anyways, it's Colorado. Time clock, payroll, school, got to fight that, get away. And then I found out they were dumping in the campground, poisoning the water, and I be here for when I first met her, so the first conversations, I heard tracking. I wasn't really sure what it meant. It took a lot of long drives, a lot of educating on the issue tracking. Then I found myself now, once you hear about it, you're going to see all kinds of stuff, and I've read a lot more. So it was really interesting to get to the protest trail. I've had this moment of just like, yeah. With 35 other people, you know what I mean? Like, not yeah, it was 100 people, 35. Oh, you can.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what he's waiting on. I'm already live. Yeah, this is live stream.
I did not. It's,
It was awesome.
I know. I'll yeah. Yeah. I'll communicate. Oh, well, those two places.
Yeah. That one's empty.
Right up there.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, I tell people incentivize them. Yeah.
He probably got a list that's a mile long. Couple of spots there.
Yeah, it just swings. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Swings and turns and does all
yeah.
still back even.
Wow. Oh, wow.
They're not very comfortable. No, but they'll do. At least we're inside and not outside in the wind. That's true.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
Okay, my name is Jeffrey Weiss of Catholic Peace Ministry, and thank you all for being here. Tonight's events are sponsored by a number of peace organizations, which I will make sure to read after Robert is done speaking, and then we'll have a question and answer. Robert came to us from Champaign, Illinois. He formed Just Foreign Policy in 2006. He's a regular contributor to Huffington Post, Truth Out, regular contributor to public radio, oftentimes more often local public radio than national public radio. He's had several appearances on Al Jazeera. He noted that he's hampered a bit by being in Champaign. If he was in D.C., he'd have much more of an opportunity to speak to the world through Al Jazeera and international media. But beyond that, he is an activist and a citizen. We do have a lot of intellectuals in our country. We have much fewer citizens, or people who believe in the concept of democracy, or at least want to work for it. Robert is definitely one of those people. Last October, only a few months ago, he went to Pakistan with Code Pink, where they were able to meet with Pakistanis and many people who are sort of on the front lines of the United States war machine, in particular the use of drones. He has been very generous to come to Iowa to be with us, and he will be custody of eastern Iowa after tonight's event, where he will give talks in a number of venues over the next few days. So we're really happy that he's come to us, especially at a time where the proposal to bring weaponized drones to our airspace may come to fruition. So without further ado, Robert Naiman, and he'll say a few words, and then we'll have a discussion. So thank you all for coming, and thank you also for being a part of the action today.
Thank you. So I'd like to start tonight with a little experiment that I've been doing in my public talks on this issue around the country for the last few months. I'm on kind of a tour, the Drone Strike Policy Reform Tour. I've been to Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, Durham, North Carolina, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Terre Haute, West Lafayette, Carbondale, Chicago, and now Des Moines, tomorrow Iowa City. And in my public talks, I've been starting by asking the audience a couple of questions, asking for your honest response. And so in order to get your honest response, like an opinion poll or an election, I'm going to ask you, or ask you these two questions, to shield your eyes so you won't be intimidated other people in the room, peer pressure. You all know who I am, and you all know who is around you, and I want to get your honest responses to these two questions. So no narking, no spying on your neighbor, no intimidation. I want your honest responses. So here's the first question. Close your eyes, cover your eyes. I want you to tell me by raising your hand for one of the following three responses. Whether it's your current opinion that there are significant ethical, legal, political problems with the drone strike policy. You're going to have three choices. Choices are yes, no, don't know, not sure, need more information. So raise your hand if it's your current opinion right now that there are significant ethical, legal, political problems with the drone strike policy. Okay, good. Put your hands down. Raise your hand if you don't think that there are, right now, in your opinion, you don't think there are significant ethical, legal, political problems with the drone strike policy. Okay, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you're not sure, need more information to say whether there's significant ethical, legal, political problems with the drone strike policy. Excellent. Put your hand down. Okay, second question. Eyes closed, no narking. I'm going to ask you if you think that people like us, assuming that your answer to the first question is yes, just suppose that your answer to the first question is yes. Do you think that the people in this room and people like us could do something about this policy? Again, the choices are to be yes or no, or don't know, not sure, need more information. So, raise your hand if you think that people in this room and people like us could do something significant and meaningful about this policy. Good. Raise your hand if you don't think that people in this room, people like us, could do something meaningful to change the policy. Okay, good. Raise your hand if you're not sure. Need more information. Okay, good. That's really interesting. I never see things that way. So, in this room, overwhelmingly, people said, yeah, we think there are, almost everybody, we think there are problems. Nobody raised their hand. You know, a few people, not sure. When I asked, could we do something, most people said yes, we could do something. And I'm delighted to see that, because that's actually not my experience. Going around giving talks around the country. Usually the room splits three ways. When I ask the second question, even in a room where everybody already agrees that there are problems. But even in this room, which is better than most, there was significant fall off. A lot of people aren't sure. More people aren't sure we could do something than aren't sure that there's a problem. So that suggests to me, as I think is often the case, maybe always the case, around activism, we always have at least two tasks. One task is to explain to people that there's a problem. And the second task is to make a convincing case that we could do something about it. Because otherwise, what's the point? You know, are we doing classical music appreciation? Is it intellectual edification we're after? Or is it social transformation and more justice in the world? I submit that it's social transformation and more justice. Okay? So what I'm going to try and do tonight is not just convince you that the drone strike policy is bad. That would be kind of easy sell in this room. But to convince you that we could do something about it, and I hope that all of you will leave this room feeling trained, feeling equipped to convince other people, more equipped, some of you are already acting on this issue, but more equipped to convince others, not only that there's a problem, but that we could do something about it. And this leads, I think, to kind of strategic question of where should we focus? There's all kind of problems with this policy. One could go on for hours talking about the different problems in this policy. But I think we can discern particular areas where this policy is particularly egregious, particularly vulnerable, politically vulnerable, and where we have the best prospects for recruiting more Americans to our side, more members of the public, more members of the media, more members of Congress, to make this policy more controversial and to put the administration under pressure for change. And that's the case I'm going to make for you tonight. Now, in many of my public talks, I show one or two videos. We don't have the technical capacity to do that here. So I'm just going to tell you about some resources that I would like you to know about, I'd like you to look at and share with us. A couple of you, I know from previous conversations, know about some of these. First of all, there's a 7-minute video by Robert Greenwald. Many of you know Robert Greenwald is an American film documentarian. He made Walmart, The High Cost and Low Price. He made out Fox. Has a foundation called Brave New Foundation. And he makes short videos about various topics, especially war, military, and in the last months about the drone strike policy. He, like me, went to Pakistan, not same trip, talked to some of the same people, and interviewed critics of the policy. And in particular, last fall, just before we went to Pakistan, a new report came out, Living Under Drones. How many people know about this report? Okay, so it's on the web. They released it on the web, livingunderdrones.org. If you go to the website, when they released the report, they released this video that Robert Greenwald did. 7-minute video where he interviews the authors of the report and also interviews survivors of the drone strikes in Pakistan. And I think this is a tremendously powerful tool because in general public opinion, we still face the fact that many Americans don't even realize that we have a serious problem with policy, serious ethical, legal, political problem with policy. And like in a 12-step program, the first step is to acknowledge that you have a problem. And many Americans have not made it to step one yet, including people who see themselves as liberals, people who care about people in other countries, are not yet aware that we have a serious problem. And I submit that a fair-minded person cannot watch the 7-minute video without coming at least to the conclusion that we have a problem, which is step one. And for example, one of the things that's documented in the report and in this video is the reports that the CIA in Pakistan has conducted so-called secondary strikes. What do people know what secondary strikes are? Good. So, secondary strike is where they hit the same target twice. They hit a target, which they've chosen how they choose targets, human intelligence, signals intelligence. And then they wait till other people gather at the site of the strike, including civilian rescuers. And then they hit the same target again. This is called a secondary strike. Some people call it a double tap, which is what counterterrorism officials call it when any terrorists do it. You know, bomb goes off in a cafe, police, rescue people come, another bomb goes off. That's called double tap when terrorists do it. The CIA does it, it's called a secondary strike. So this is a really egregious thing. Because in international law, there's a right to rescue. international law in a war, which our government claims is a war, that's a contested claim. In a war, even putting that to the side, assume that's a war. Even in a war, there are rules. Even in a war, there's international law. Even in a war, you can't kill everybody you want. You're supposed to distinguish between combatants and civilians. That's a basic feature of the law of war. And the UN Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Execution is on record saying, if the United States is doing this, it's a war crime. So, I submit, there's lots of debate about, well, is this a legal war? It was authorized by Congress. We're in a new world because of the global war on terror, or whatever you want to call it now, that phrase is no longer politically correct, but we have the same policy without the phrase. Regardless of all that debate, even if it's a legal war, secondary strikes are a war crime. So I don't think you can know the fact, I don't think you can be a fair-minded person and know the fact that independent reporting says CIA has conducted secondary strikes in Pakistan, civilian rescue, and not acknowledge that we have a serious problem. The U.S. government has never been called to account for this. There's never been, U.S. officials have never had to answer this allegation on the record, with one exception, as far as I know. When we were in Pakistan, this Code Pink delegation, we had 2 meetings with the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Richard Hogan, the acting U.S. ambassador, and we asked him about that. And he said, well, that hasn't happened on my watch. I've been here in Pakistan. We haven't done it. Okay. Well, I'm glad he said that. But that's not the level of accountability I would like to have from the United States government. I would like U.S. officials of Washington to have to answer these charges that have been reported repeatedly in mainstream media. The Independent, in Britain, the New York Times. Let them answer this on the record. And the United Nations is currently investigating the U.S. drone strike policy, and this is one of the things that they're investigating, the reports of secondary strike. So this is a key example, I think, for people to know about this accusation, these reports of secondary strike. Again, regardless of what else is true, it's widely recognized in international law, secondary strikes are a war crime. So this is a key tool. If you know people who don't see a problem yet, haven't acknowledged there's a problem yet, I encourage you to share this 7-minute video. A second key tool, which is just recently available, it's like from a week ago. Last Tuesday, something happened in Washington that hasn't happened in 10 years of this policy. A subcommittee in the Senate held a public hearing on the drone strike policy. Totally historic. Congress is supposed to oversee the administration. But for 9 years, since the CIA started its policy of drone strikes in Pakistan, there was never a public hearing about the policy. Finally, last week, Senator Durbin held a public hearing in the Constitution Subcommittee of Senate Judiciary Committee. And he invited strong witnesses to criticize the policy. And one of the witnesses that he invited was a young Yemeni man named Fareya al-Muslim. How many people saw his testimony? Okay, this is a powerful tool. This was a powerful performance. This guy has a very unique story and is a unique spokesman for criticism of the policy. First of all, there was never a hearing, let alone letting someone from one of these countries that the U.S. is bombing with this policy come and try and tell Congress and the American people what this policy looks like from the other side. And Freya Muslim is someone who's researched this policy in Yemen and interviewed drone strike survivors and people in these communities to talk about the impact. But that's just one reason why he had a powerful account to tell, because of his research. The second reason why he has a powerful personal story is that he went to high school in the United States. And he talked about in his testimony how he was from a very poor family in Yemen. His father's a farmer, his parents are uneducated. But when he was in school, somebody encouraged him to apply for an American scholarship. And something in the State Department, Amity, he was able to study in an American school in Yemen. And then after that, he was able to apply to another program where he became an exchange student and went to high school in the United States. So this is someone who speaks English, has lived in the United States, knows Americans, spoke very eloquently in the hearing about his love for the United States and how he saw himself as an ambassador for the United States in Yemen, and how he hates Al Qaeda and is, trying to explain to his Yemeni friends and correspondents what his experience living in the United States is, and says, and this is in the context in which you guys are droning my countrymen, undermining my work, and recruiting people for Al Qaeda with this hated, controversial policy. That was the second compelling thing about his testimony. The third compelling thing about his testimony was that it just so happened that in the week before the hearing, his home village was hit with a drone strike. And he talked about the experience of being contacted by people in his village who are saying, why did this happen? Why did your American friends do this to us? And the terror of people in the village when this drone strike happened. They knew the guy that the U.S. Was trying to kill. Had no idea he was a U.S. target. So this created a special kind of terror. Like, what if I had been standing next to this guy? What if my children had been standing next to this guy? Why wasn't this guy just arrested? And Freya Muslim says in the hearing, this guy, everybody knew where he was. He could have been easily arrested. Why hit this guy with a drone? So this is a very compelling story that Freya Muslim told in the hearing. And if you watch the hearing, you can see the senator's kind of chilled by his testimony. And this got a lot of U.S. media players, the New York Times, the Washington Post. He was interviewed on MSNBC by Chris Hayes. So again, I submit to you that this is something that puts in front of a fair-minded person who's not totally close-minded about this policy. And I think many Americans formed a very superficial notion about this policy a year ago or 2 years ago. They heard something about it. They heard the official story that this is a policy to keep you safe. This is a policy, as President Obama said in January of last year, narrowly targeted on a list of top-level terrorist leaders. That's what President Obama said last January. In April, John Brennan said, let me assure you, civilian casualties have been extremely rare. So this is the official story that many Americans believe. This is a narrowly focused policy targeted on a list of top-level terrorist leaders, and civilian casualties have been extremely rare. And now we're in a period in the last 6 months where there's unprecedented criticism in the public sphere of this policy. So this is an opportunity to go back to people and say, we need you to take a second look. Because we have new information now that we didn't have a year ago. This policy has been kept secret from the American people. And a story was created, a false story, based on these two The lie that this is narrowly targeted against top-level terrorist leaders, and the lie that civilian casualties have been extremely rare. The record of independent reporting tells a very different story. The record of independent reporting suggests that of the people killed in Pakistan by CIA drone strikes since 2004, only 2% have been suspected top-level terrorist leaders. 2%. And over that same period of time, the tally of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London suggests that 6% of those killed have been children. And nobody contests that children are civilians. So 3 times as many children as top-level terrorism. The same tally, and this is a conservative tally, these are journalists in London who are carefully counting based on press reports and other reports that they feel they can substantiate. The same tally suggests that 20% of those killed, 1/5, have been civilians. So 2% top-level terrorist leaders, 6% children, 20% civilians. That is not consistent with the story that this program is narrowly targeted on top-level terrorists. That's not consistent with the story that civilian casualties have been extremely rare. A year ago, in February of last year, the Washington Post did a poll and had a bunch of questions. One of the questions was about the drone strike program. And the Washington Post reported this poll, banner headline, Americans support the drone strike program. 80% of Americans, according to this poll, support the drone strike. Well, you open up the poll and look at what the question is. The question is, do you support targeting terrorist leaders with drone strikes? So they didn't ask, how do you feel about the actual policy that exists on planet Earth? They asked, how do you feel about the lies? And it turns out the lies are very popular. 4 out of 5 Americans thought the lies were just dandy. But it's reasonable to ask, what does it mean to say that the public supports the policy when the public doesn't know what the policy is? Recently, finally, in the last few months, there was some polling by Huffington Post and YouGov, and they asked more detailed questions. They asked people, how do you feel about targeting top-level terrorist leaders? And they said, yeah, majority is for that. How do you feel about targeting anybody suspected of being a terrorist? No. Just the top-level terrorists. How do you feel if there is a risk of civilian casualties? No. Majority doesn't like that. Don't do it if there's a risk of civilian casualties. A risk of civilian casualties. Don't do it. In fact, other polling found that when you insert this question about civilian casualties, support for a military operation drops as much as when you tell people there's a risk of American military casualties. Same effect. Should we go get these terrorists if no American soldiers are killed? Sure. How about if your American soldiers are killed? Support drops. Should we go get these terrorists if there's no danger of civilian casualties? Sure. How about if there's a risk of civilian casualties? Support drops. So you see, there's a story that people sometimes tell that Americans don't care about civilian casualties. It turns out that's a lie too. It's not true. The thing is that people can't care about that which they don't know about. So if nobody tells them that civilians are being killed, then they can't care about the civilian casualties that they don't know about. So this is why it's so important that we lift the lid on this policy. When critics say we need more transparency, the word transparency sounds like a kind of technocratic inside baseball world. Transparency. We're against the whole policy. Transparency. But you see, this issue of transparency and secrecy is a matter of life and death. Because of the secrecy that they're able to carry about a policy which would be unpopular if people knew about it. Okay? So that's one reason to push on this issue of secrecy and transparency. Second reason to push on this issue of secrecy and transparency is because this is where the administration is most politically vulnerable. In some of the talks that I've been giving around the United States, a couple of them have been debates. I debated in Minneapolis, this lawyer who used to work for the CIA, and in Durham, North Carolina, I debated as general. And their role in the debate was to defend the policy, say that the policy is basically okay. Even these debates, when I said the administration must share more information with the public and Congress, they agreed. These supporters of the policy agreed that the administration is being too secretive. If you look at this hearing that took place last week, Lindsey Graham was a strong supporter of the policy. Said, I don't agree with the president on much, but I strongly support the president's use of drones. Lindsey Graham is not even on this committee, came to the hearing just to defend the policy. Even Lindsey Graham agrees the policy should be more transparent. The policy should be less secretive. So you see, the administration is very vulnerable criticism on this. But why don't they want to share more information? Because every time they let a little bit of information out, people are scandalized, and the policy becomes more unpopular. So, for example, earlier this year, they got put under pressure after they nominated John Brennan to head the CIA. John Brennan has been kind of an architect of the policy as the White House counterterrorism advisor. So when Obama nominated Brennan to head the CIA, people thought this is an opportunity to challenge the policy. And Senator Ron Wyden and 10 other senators wrote to the administration and said, before we confirm your guy and the CIA, we want to see these drone strike memos. And you've been hiding from us for years. Members of the House and Senate have been writing to the administration saying, we want to see the Office of Legal Counsel memos that purport to justify the legality of this policy. And the administration refused to hand them over. Even the Senate and House Intelligence Committee, committees established by Congress in the 1970s for the express purpose of reviewing classified information. Even these committees were not allowed to see the memos that purport to justify the policy, which, in a sense, are the policy. Because if you don't, it's the memos that tell you what the administration, what the legal authority that they're claiming, what the boundary of the policy is. So if you don't have memos, you don't know what the policy is. And so you can't do oversight. How do you do oversight of a policy if you don't even know what the policy is? So at long last, Brennan is nominated to head the CIA. 11 senators write the administration and say, we want to see these memos. And hint that, maybe your guy won't get confirmed if we don't see these memos before the hearing. So finally, the administration decided under pressure, key lesson, pressure works, not pressure doesn't work. Just writing the letter, that didn't work. But when there was a threat, then the administration started to move. So the administration thought, well, let's throw them a bone. So they leaked this white paper. This white paper was an unclassified document that had been previously shared with some in Congress. There was a summary, unclassified summary of some of the information in the drone strike memos about targeting America. And they thought, well, maybe this, will appease them. Appease critics a little bit, gave some information. Well, what happened instead? What happened was an explosion because people read the memo. 16 pages showing that the administration was wiping its butt with international law, including explaining that, according to the administration, the traditional concept of imminent threat is no longer relevant in this case. It's a key idea in international law and domestic law about when you can use force. Are you under imminent threat? If somebody attacks you, you can use force, no question about it. But if somebody's about to attack you, then you can use force, no question about it. But the administration said, we're in their white paper, we're in a new world now. Global war on terror, whatever you want to call it. Post-September 11th. We don't need to know, we don't need to have specific intelligence that these particular people have attacked the United States, are about to attack the United States, plan to attack the United States. It's enough for us to know, or think we know, that they're members of Al-Qaeda or an associated force to Al-Qaeda. If that's true, we think they're members of this associated force, then that's enough. Because even if they're not planning to attack the United States now, we can assume that they will attack the United States in the future when they get the chance. And we can't afford to wait while danger gathers. Now, the melody of these words should sound familiar, because this was exactly the argument that Bush and Cheney and their people gave in 2002 for preemptive strike against Iraq. We can't wait while danger gathers. Don't let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud. That's what the administration is saying in this white paper. We can do a preemptive strike without evidence that we are about to be attacked. So when people saw this in black and white in this 16-page memo, a lot of people freaked, including a lot of Republicans. And Senator Mike Lee, I was in the hearing in Washington when Eric Holder, who's our Attorney General, was testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee in a regular oversight hearing of the Justice Department, but it happened to take place in the context of this debate, which suddenly broke out about administration policy because of the Brennan confirmation hearing and the release of the white paper. So Senator Mike Lee, Republican, asked Attorney General Holder about the white paper. He said, I'm very concerned by what it says in this white paper about imminent threat and how you're claiming the legal authority off of any battlefield to attack someone about you whom you have no evidence that they've attacked the United States. You have no evidence that they are about to attack the United States. You have no evidence that they're planning to attack the United States. I'm very concerned about what you're saying about imminent threat. And Attorney General Holder said, well, you can't understand this white paper in isolation. You have to read it, to understand the white paper, you have to read it in conjunction with the underlying legal advice on which it's based. By which he meant the Office of Legal Counsel memos that the administration refuses to disclose to Congress. The very document that the administration refused to hand over, which finally in the last few months, under threat and pressure, now they have shared some of the documents with the intelligence committees, some of the documents with the judiciary committee, but so far only the memos concerning the targeting of Americans, not the memos concerning the targeting of other people outside of battlefield, traditional battlefield, in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Still to this day, the intelligence and judiciary committees don't have these documents, which specify the legal authority that the administration is claiming to conduct drone strikes. I think this is incredibly telling about where we stand with respect to this policy. We claim that we live in a democracy. This policy is the facts, the details, the actuality of this policy are being kept secret from the American people, the American media, and members of Congress. Your members of Congress are being kept in the dark about this policy. Your guy Grassley is the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. We were just talking about this at dinner. What can you do with Grassley? Well, what you do with Grassley is say, what are you doing? The administration is hiding this information from you. What are you going to do about that? So it's one thing to say, people say, we're very happy, we got this contract, the drones are coming to Iowa, they have these jobs. I'm asking you to put a different question on the table. How do you feel about a secret and unaccountable war, where we're not even allowed to know basic details about the policy? How do you feel about a Congress that's asleep and isn't doing minimal oversight and pressing the administration to release these documents? Senator Leahy, who's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, publicly threatened to issue a subpoena for the drone strike document. But he hasn't followed through on the threat. So, my question for Senator Grassley would be, do you support a subpoena for the drone strike document if the administration won't hand them over? And try to get him to answer this question on the record and say the word subpoena publicly. Let the word subpoena come out of his mouth. Let the press in Iowa report that Senator Grassley said the word subpoena. That the Judiciary Committee should subpoena these documents. Because that's a key marker that everybody is looking for. People in the press are looking for. How serious is Congress? Okay, you made a little noise around Rand Paul. How serious are you on your follow-through? Are you just kind of waiting till the dust settles and you go back to doing nothing and ignoring it? So this is where public pressure is key. Getting on these members of Congress and staying there until they do something to force the administration. Because the administration has shown that in absence of pressure, you're just going to continue with the status quo. The question is Congress going to put pressure on the administration? The thing that's going to answer that are members of the public putting pressure on Congress. So when we were at the rally this morning, I said, I'm delighted that we're here protesting outside the debate because we need to get the message out about what these drones mean. And this is not just another business, just another job. What these drones stand for is killing innocent people in other countries. But we also need to demonstrate in congressional offices. I mean, inside, meet with them, talk to them, call them, email them, demonstrate outside their offices if they don't move. Get in the press. Get in the press with a demonstration saying, after, if you meet with Grassley and he refuses to move, he refuses to say the word subpoena, then have a demonstration and say, we're holding Senator Grassley accountable. We're holding Senator Harkin accountable. We're holding the representatives from Iowa accountable. Because it's because of them, it's because of their silence, sitting on their hands, covering their eyes, that we have this policy that the administration is doing. We have this fight about the issue of civilian casualties. Administration, when they say anything at all, it's not on record mostly. Some administration officials, civilian casualties extremely rare. There's record of independent reporting that I talked about. 6% children, Pakistan, 20% civilian. We met with Ambassador Hoagland. Asked him about this. He said, well, I knew you were going to ask me about this. So I checked the number on the way over. Before coming to meet you, I checked the number. It's classified, he said. It's classified. So the United States government, our government, has a number, an official number, of the number of civilians it thinks is killed in Pakistan with drone strikes since 2004. And that number is classified. Why? Why is that number classified? Is that a national security secret? Like the nuclear codes? Like the troop movements? Like the technical specifications on nuclear submarines? They're not supposed to classify stuff just because it's politically embarrassing. So this is a question I would like you to ask the Iowa congressional delegation. Why is the U.S. government count of civilian dead in Pakistan classified? And why won't you force that number to be public? And we have an opportunity coming up. Every year, there's a bill in the House and the Senate called the National Defense Authorization Act. It's an authorization act for the Pentagon. And every year, everybody who's concerned about U.S. foreign military policy uses this as a vehicle. I mean, everybody's working on these issues on Washington. Uses this as a vehicle to introduce amendments to try and force a change in policy, or at least force a public fight about administration policy. The groups that are working the drone strike policy in Washington are talking about how can we use the NDAA to make a fight about the drone strike policy. And one of the things that we're going to try and do, I hope, is get the Congress to try to pass legislation that will compel the administration to disclose more information about the policy. So this will be an opportunity for you to hammer on the Iowa congressional delegation. How are you going to vote on this legislation? So we have opportunities to force these people onto the record. Congress is a part of the problem. People talk, it's a key, crucial part of the problem. People talk about an imperial presidency. Oh my God, Obama's doing this and that. How could he? You can't have an imperial presidency without a sleeping Congress. And Congress is something we can get at more easily than we get at the president, particularly the House. You can get members of the House. You can turn members of the House. Even Republican members of the House, you can turn them if you get on them and stay on them. We turned in Champion-Urbana, we turned our Republican member of the House against the Iraq and Afghanistan war. He voted for the Iraq war. Later he said, you were right, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And he became one of the biggest critics in the House of the war. Started fighting against everything.
Who was that?
Tim Johnson. He was one of the 19 that wrote the letter to President Bush against the surge. And then he just became voted against the money, voted against everything, joined Dennis Kucin's lawsuit against the Libya war. I mean, just became totally turned. And sometimes these guys, when they turn all the way. Walter Jones. Walter Jones, Freedom Prize. He's the guy who introduced, North Carolina introduced the resolution in the House before the Iraq War, to punish the French for their disagreeing with us about the Iraq War, changing French fries in the House cafeteria, Freedom Prize. That guy, he admitted he was wrong, and he apologized. He went to too many funerals, and he became one of the sharpest critics in the House of the Iraq War, and then the war in Afghanistan, still to this day. So we can turn these people if we stay on them. And I submit to you that you can turn people in Iowa against this policy if you stay on it, particularly with the right acts. So, can you turn these people against drones? That's something else. But can you get them to say the president must share information about what he's doing? That I submit to you can make these people do. So this is my ask. This is my ask going forward. You figure this out. You're politically active. You have demonstrations. You do political stuff. Figure out how to put pressure on your congressional delegation and figure out how to get in local media around these issues and stay there, particularly around these issues of transparency and secrecy, where, I don't know what your local media is like, but on these issues, the national media is on our side. The national media is on our side. The New York Times is on our side. The New York Times, since 2010, has, together with the ACLU, been suing the Obama administration in federal court under the Freedom of Information Act to release these same drone strike numbers. So they have the same position as we do on this issue. And my experience in talking to local media in the different places that I've given talks is that they're very sympathetic. They smell a rat with the fact that the administration is hiding information. So, my pitch, let's press the adversary where the adversary is weak. Where the adversary is weak is on the issue of secrecy and transparency, and their refusal to share basic information about this policy with Congress and the American people. And try to get your representatives and senators on the record on this issue of secrecy, transparency, and information. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to do a couple of things quickly before question and answer. I wanted to, Robert, we have a couple of quick gifts for you before the Q&A.
Thank you.
This is our Catholic Peace Ministry T-shirt. The world says no to war. The people in the gym who don't like it, I asked them where their T-shirt was made. Probably not in the United States. And also our plowshare band, which is made from a fighter jet, more constructive. They don't beat their swords into plowshares.
I've heard that.
I wanted to also pass around a basket. I know that lots of you contribute to Catholic Peace Ministry and a lot of the other organizations that put this together, which I promise, I will read now when Q&A gets done because I rushed up here without my sheet. But we just want to try to recoup some of the cost for the blessing of bringing Rob here. So I will pass it around and then I'll just turn it over for Q&A. So, all right, Rob, you're back. So questions from the audience, comments? Yeah.
I wasn't sure I understood what the 2% share is killed, 6% of the children. How many
Yeah.
At the end.
Right. Everybody has that. No, I'm glad that you asked that. Because 2, 6, and 20 don't add up to 100. So the others are, according to the United States, militant, low-level militant. According to Pakistanis, they're civilians. If you ask Pakistanis what percentage of people killed have been civilians, they'll say 80%. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism numbers, as it fits Western journalists, are conservative, they're cautious. They say, like, we're making a list of people's names, and we're saying, this person was killed, and we say they're a civilian, this is how we know that they're a civilian, from this report and this report. So that's the discrepancy between the Bureau of Investigative Journalism and what Pop Times. Now, the New York Times reported last summer. I mean, people try to figure out where does this discrepancy come from between what the U.S. is saying, no, we never go civilian, and what everybody else is saying. The New York Times reported last May 29th, major expose on the drone strike policy. The CIA was counting all military-aged males killed by drone strikes as militants. By definition, if you're killed by a drone strike and you're male and you're military age, you're a bad guy. And their logic was, you were near somebody we were trying to kill. And if you weren't a bad guy, what were you doing? In December, Senator Feinstein, after the confirmation hearing with John Brennan, Senator Feinstein, who claimed that the Senate Intelligence Committee has been doing careful oversight of CIA drone strike, Senator Feinstein told reporters that she was unaware of reports that the CIA was counting all military-aged males as militants. 6 months after this was reported in major expose on the other questions?
I was listening to a piece on PBS this evening, Foreign News event, and they were explaining the secrecy, government secrecy, and the Obama administration's increase in secrecy by saying that, of course, the reason for that is the reason for the Obama administration continuing to push policies in many areas with regard to the war on terror is that if there would eventually be another terrorist attack, either party, any party, to reduce the terrorism budget, or seem to be reducing the effort to fight terrorism, would be blamed. And that's sort of the excuse. And of course, we have seen, as with the attack on the embassy or consulate or CIA station, whatever it was, in Boston, that there is this nasty political back and forth between the parties. So, in a purely political sense, it's easy to understand the narrow reasoning for that, behind that excuse. So, I guess my question is, how much of this lunatic war on terror stuff is really about the nasty politics between the Democratic and Republican parties?
It's hard to say how much. It's clearly some. And I'll add to your story. I think cable news also has a lot to answer for in terms of creating a political climate of mean-spirited, vengeful, and racist stupidity. We saw in the wake of the Boston attack, it was like, I don't know how it was for you. To me, I had like a little bit of PTSD. Like, we're doing the September 11th thing again, at the loop, and the over and over, and the stupidity of the racism. But I mean, fortunately, it turned out it wasn't as long or as intense, and it seemed like the pushback was sooner and more effective. Those TV stations got a lot of criticism, sharp, hard-hitting criticism early on for saying things that weren't true, and accusing people who are innocent, and promoting racism and xenophobia. So, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it. Look, I think this policy could ever happen in the first place if not for the devaluing of Pakistani and Yemeni civilian life. You couldn't come up with this policy in a climate in which the innocent lives of Pakistanis and Yemenis weren't held cheap. So, so absolutely, political climate and what people know about is a big part of it. And I think that means it's part of our task to humanize people in Pakistan, which is again, I think, why these tools, these videos, are so important. This is the actual human being like me, eyes and hands, telling their story about what happened to them and people that they know. I think that's tremendous. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that the Obama administration officials are evil men. I think they're responding to the incentives that they perceive. This idea that, whatever you say now, there's going to be a terrorist act, we're going to be blamed, and we have to do everything possible. And I think there's also a bureaucratic momentum that happens when, you tell the CIA people, okay, your job is to keep America safe. Okay, well, how are you supposed to do that? Well, get the bad guys. Oh, okay, well, we know how to get the bad guys, find some bad guys, and get them. And the CIA has a get the bad guys. And what hasn't counted enough until now is the negative impact of killing a lot of people who most people would say, wait, those weren't bad guys. We don't have any reason for thinking that those were bad guys. And, obviously that's a moral stain on the United States in the perception of people in these countries. It tells them loudly that the United States government holds their life cheaply. And that's, in addition to being a moral outrage, is also politically counterproductive. And people even, in U.S. government are increasingly saying it. People in the State Department saying it. And this hearing last Tuesday, General Cartwright said it. General Cartwright recently retired number 2 of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying, I'm worried that this policy has become counterproductive. So I think regardless of what was true in the past, and I would agree substantially with that story, like how did we get to where we are, that's part of how it got to where we are. But, I mean, I think the question going forward is, should we go someplace different? And I think we can go someplace different. I think we turn a page in public opinion, and turn a page in the media, and I think we turn a page in the Obama administration, because there already are people in the Obama administration who basically share the critique, particularly people in the State Department. And so it's a question of changing the dynamics in Washington. There's more public and media support for the critique than the dissident group in Washington can win over the situation where until now it's been basically the CIA has had all power and nobody else has had a say. Go ahead.
Where are these drones made? And I always go the big war machine. I mean, whoever is making them wants to, he doesn't care how they're used, he just wants to sell them. Where are they made?
They're made all over the United States. Unfortunately, as you probably know, our military contractors have a political strategy of spreading out their production of all the big weapon systems across the United States in order to build this support. In fact, there's a caucus in the House called Drone Caucus, which is members of Congress that are related to this industry from their home state. And there has been some organizing around the companies actually producing producing these weapons.
How many do we have?
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody else know the answer to that question? It's definitely growing. The perception, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how many, but it's like something like 100 times more than we expect to have at this time in 2013 when we were looking at the problem in 2002.
There's definitely a climate and has been a climate in Washington that this is this new big thing, and this is part of the dynamic that we face is that there is a lobby that wants the government to purchase a lot of these things. There's a perception, which is true actually, that this is the technology is cheaper than a lot of other weapon systems. And that's true. It's not much harder. It's not hard to be cheaper than the F-35, $1.5 trillion. But yeah, but I think that's where they're strong. I think where we're strong is forcing them to defend the policy, not forcing them to defend the existence of the technology. That's where they're strong and we're weak. Where we're strong and they're weak is forcing them to defend the policy. Let me see if there's any other questions. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned a website, the very start, video living.
Yeah, living.org. So, my students were always delighted when I used the computer instead of writing. And has such terrible handwriting. So livingwiththecountry.org. This has the okay, it's not my fault. And Freya al-Muslimi is the Yemeni guy. And this is on YouTube, but we put it up on our website.
It might also be on the C-SPAN archives if C-SPAN covered that during.
Can't see that?
Just
JustForeignPolicy.org.
You mentioned that hearing with Senator Durbin. Is that available somewhere?
Yes. So that whole thing, which was about 2 hours long, you can find that on C-SPAN. And you could also just Google it after it's complete. But yeah, that's really fascinating. You have Farrell Muslim's testimony, General Cartwright's testimony, Rosa Brooks is a professor of law at Georgetown. So there's a lot of good stuff. You get to see what senators say in the back. Very interesting. Yeah.
You mentioned like that kid saying something like, "You are recruiting for Al Qaeda."
Right.
And I've been convinced of something like that for a long time, but a lot of people don't see it that way or have trouble swallowing it. And why? Why do you think that's so hard for people to accept? Or how can we help, like, tell that story? Or
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think one thing is that make people watch this video. Sit down and make them watch this video. Because I think part of the story is people form certain ideas for whatever reason, a lack of information, a lot of people who are liberal Democrats feel defensive about, tendency to feel defensive about criticism of President Obama, especially if it seems like, mean-spirited or ill-motivated personal criticism of Obama. For example, this was really clear during Rand Paul filibuster. People who already working on the issue of drones and aware of it, in my experience, totally delighted by the Rand Paul filibuster. liberal Democrats that didn't really follow the issue, they're like, man, Rand Paul, he's just attacking the president. If Republicans were doing it, they would love it, blah, blah, blah. So there's a hurdle to get across of people being kind of fixed in a certain mindset. But I think one thing that gets across, helps get across the hurdle, is putting in front of people the testimony of victims, particularly articulate victims, and people from these countries, like Freyo Muslim was saying, look, I love America. I want us to be friends. I want us to have close relations. You're undermining close relations by this policy. That's an argument that's hard to answer. You see, like, the reaction of senators to that argument, you could see that was troubling. Another interesting thing that happened in the hearing was, if you look at the conversation back and forth, some of the senators were saying, like, what's all this fuss about drone strikes per se? What's so terrible about a drone compared to other things? Like a cruise missile or a bomber, why a drone strike is terrible? And there are a lot of answers to that. But one of the answers that one of the senators themselves gave was, it doesn't really matter. Because if people in these countries say that they find this particularly bothersome, that's what matters. Right? It's really not, we can say here, like, why are you being so irrational? So that this bother you more than being killed in some other way. But that doesn't matter, because it's up to people to say. It's like, people say, why are these Native Americans complaining about these sports mascots? That's not racist. It's not for you to say. It's for them to say. Right? So this is kind of like that. It's for people in Yemen to say that this policy is so terrible. There's one of the things that people say is that it's people perceive it as really cowardly. There's this idea, whether you agree with it or not, the traditional war, you have skin in the game. Like, you're trying to kill people, but your people could also be killed. And now you have this war where you don't have any skin in the game. You're just killing from the air, from thousands of miles away. Okay, maybe that doesn't seem like a rational argument to you. But it doesn't matter if it seems like a rational argument to you. In the countries where you're doing this policy, that's how a lot of people perceive it. Wow, America, what a cowardly country. Wants to fight people, we have a war here, but doesn't even want to put any soldiers in there. So, I think that's maybe a way that some people can get around. It seemed like in hearing that some senators, like a light bulb went off, and, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what we think. It matters what they think.
The idea of using transparency as the major issue really resonates with me, and I would guess there'd be a number of us who will be willing to pick up on that. But how does that relate to just a general denial of truth in other areas too? It's just not drones. Take Venezuela, for example, and how we demonize that country. There's something much more serious than transparency in drones.
So, I think I couldn't agree with you more. It's always true, and it's always important to always remember that what we know, other Americans don't know. And that hiding of information and the lying is always part of the terrain. And therefore, the good news about that is that means that we always have something to do just by telling the truth. Just by telling the truth, we're accomplishing something. Howard Zinn had this line, which I like very much, was that, Jen should probably move. It's a tribute to the American people that the government feels they have lied about U.S. foreign policy. What they're saying is that if they told the truth, then people wouldn't accept it. I think they're right.
What do we do with the people who tell us the truth, expose the truth? WikiLeaks.
Yeah, so the government doesn't like it. People don't. Well, there's a shocker. So truth is hugely important. And then also, in all our work, the question of validators is always important. Like, it's one thing to know what the truth is. It's another thing to find people who are telling the truth that can't be ignored. Okay, you think I'm a hippie, long-haired, pot-smoking, tofu-crunching, granola head, but here's General Cartwright. Is he a hippie, pot-smoking, tofu cruncher? Number 2 of the joint she just stabbed? You ignore what he said? And he's not the first military person or even intelligent person. Kill Cullen, Dennis Blair, the former director of national intelligence, Stanley McChrystal, who was the commander of troops in Afghanistan. All of them have come out and criticized the drone strike policy. And this is, and again, there's like a vicious circle and virtuous circle. So the vicious circle is, for years we had this dynamic where the policy's secret, information's not coming out, people believing the lies, there's no alternative story getting out, members of Congress aren't saying anything. The press sees, looks at the public, policy's popular. Looks at Congress, nobody's raising any questions. Therefore, this isn't an issue. Therefore, we're not going to report on it. Therefore, the public doesn't get information. Therefore, the public doesn't pressure Congress. It's a vicious circle. But when the circle breaks, then you get a virtuous circle. So now, Congress is basically starting to raise questions. So the press is reporting more. So the public is hearing an alternative story. So then they're telling Congress. So then Congress is doing it. So then the press is reporting. So this is what we're starting to be now. I think our task is to try and intensify this, make it go faster. Because the faster we make it go, the more lives we save. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about the United Nations investigation into the United States on the issue of Geneva Convention and war crimes. Number one, is this somewhat, or is it unprecedented for a authoritative as the United Nations can be, to investigate publicly the United States of America for war crimes? And or how did it come about, and where do you think it's going to go?
It's not unprecedented, but it's rare. When Bradley Manning was in Quantico, the UN Special Rapporteur for Torture tried to visit him and was denied. He was actually, oh yeah, you can visit him, but you can't visit him alone. And he said, that's no good. That's not how we do it. I gotta see him alone. Because we have an allegation that he's being mistreated, and I gotta ask him about it in private. Now, your people, in room. So the U.S. got some flack for that. And I think it's one of the reasons why he was transferred out of Quantico, is because there were pressure. I mean, the demonstrations helped, and there was criticism in the media. Even, P.J. Crowley, the State Department spokesman, criticized him. He lost his job. But, all these things together helped it happen. So I think it's a very big deal. The United States government doesn't like it when they're investigating, they're called to account. It's going to put them on pressure. What's going to happen? I mean, first of all, I think it's already having a good effect. People know it's coming. I think when the report comes out, it's going to make a big splash. And I think that in particular, some of these aspects that are totally indefensible, like the secondary strikes, I suspect that the U.S. will deny that they've done it, but I suspect they're going to stop doing it. Other questions? Okay, now I've been holding you back.
Well, now the solution, obviously, is to use drones to identify and locate, and then to send in appropriate personnel to arrest. Is that being done? Is there any evidence of that?
No. Although interestingly, one example of that happening to some degree is that, when the United States decided to get Osama bin Laden, regardless of what you think about what they didn't use a drone. They talked about using a drone, but they didn't use a drone. They sent in SEALs. And the story that they told was that if they used a drone and just blew up the building, then they would never be able to prove who was in the building. They could say we got Osama bin Laden, but they wouldn't have any proof. They just blew up the building with a drone. They want to be able to prove we got Osama bin Laden. So they sent the SEAL. So it's kind of interesting that you have this, perhaps telling, you have this policy that's being sold with the story that, we need this policy to get top-level terrorist bad guy. But when you went to get the number one top-level terrorist bad guy, you didn't use a drone. You used Navy SEAL. So that's maybe, an additional indictment of the policy. But they're not going in and getting people for a lot of reasons. I think they don't have to say, really. But a lot of people, one thing is putting people in risk. Another thing a lot of people are saying, particularly Republicans, is that, Bush got a lot of criticism for the extraordinary mission, the secret CIA prisons, the, waterboarding, and interrogation. Obama closed the secret prisons and hasn't taken any new people to Guantanamo, but he's killing people with drone strikes. So on the one hand, you have criticism of indefinite detention and extraordinary rendition and extraordinary interrogation techniques. On the other hand, you just have killing people. So their accusation is, oh, okay, you don't want to be criticized for holding people, so you just kill them. And I think that's a charge that's hard to answer, actually, because they deny it. But, they say, oh, no, we don't have anything against capturing people. But you look at what they're doing, and they're killing. They're not capturing. And I think part of the story is that at the end of the day, they're declaring people to be bad guys that they could never defend in a court of law. So we have these people in Guantanamo. Well, we have one group of people that have been cleared for release. The government itself says there's no effect in the United States, still held them. But then there's another group of people, and they say, well, it's too dangerous for us to release them, but we can't try them in court. And so there's really no answer to this consistent with the rule of law and consistent with their determination to declare people to be bad guys for whom they cannot convince a public court with ordinary standards of evidence that these people are bad guys that should be held. And I don't think there's any answer to that except to say, okay, enough time has passed, and we're going to obey the rule of law now.
One question, I don't know if this has ever come up, anything that you've seen or talked about or anything. Has there ever been any issues brought up where drones could be used to target people within the United States, including natural-born American citizens who have not even a criminal record of a trespass charge?
So the answer is yes. In fact, this issue was at the core of the Rand Paul filibuster. And it started with the Brennan confirmation hearing. The official official story of the government, this is both the Bush administration and Obama administration, why do you think they have the legal authority to do this? And their answer is that in 2001, after the September 11th attacks, Congress passed an authorization, the authorization to use the military force, saying that the president is authorized to use force against those he deems responsible for the September 11th attacks and those who harbored or aided or abetted. And so the administration, both administrations and their supporters say there's no geography in this authorization. Doesn't say Afghanistan, doesn't even say Al-Qaeda. Just says the president is authorized to use force against those deemed responsible and those who harbored them. So according to them, this authorization has no geographic limit. Well, according to that story begs an obvious question. If it has no geographic limit, does it extend to the United States? And when Brennan was going through this confirmation hearing, before the in-person oral hearing, the committee submits written questions to the nominee. So in the written questions of the Senate Intelligence Committee to Brennan, they asked him, is the administration claiming the legal authority to conduct drone strikes in the United States? And Brennan answered, the administration has no intention of conducting drone strikes in the United States. And people's heads exploded because they said, that's not the question we asked you. We didn't ask you whether you're currently planning to conduct drone strikes in the United States. We asked you, is the president claiming the legal authority to conduct drone strikes in the United States? And it was the anger about Brennan's answer to Senate Intelligence Committee's question that caused Rand Paul to do filibuster, saying the administration has to state clearly that they do not have this legal authority. And there's this back and forth, in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Mike Lee asked, because then Attorney General said yes, we do have the legal authority, but only in extreme circumstances, like Pearl Harbor or September 11th. And they said, and Rand Paul and I said, that's not the question. There's no dispute that you can use lethal force against lethal force to protect yourself from lethal force. There's nobody had, September 11th, nobody had any question that there's more planes than our planes. Nobody ever disputed that. The question is, can you hit somebody who's not attacking you and who isn't an imminent threat? Senator Lee put it in the Judiciary Committee hearing. Could you hit an American on American soil sitting in a coffee shop? If you say he's a terrorist, suppose you say he's a member of Al-Qaeda. But he's not right now. Right now he's drinking his coffee. Could you hit him in the coffee shop? And finally, Holder said, no, we couldn't do that under the constitutional law because he's not an imminent threat. But you see, the administration in Yemen and in Pakistan and Somalia, the administration is saying, yes, we can hit that guy sitting in a coffee shop, drinking his coffee. That's what generated the question, was the fact that in the white paper, the administration is saying, we can hit someone under the Constitution and the law. Even an American citizen on foreign soil, sitting in a coffee shop, on the basis that we believe that they're a member of Al-Qaeda or an associated force, whatever that is.
So did he ever put that in writing?
Yes.
Obama? Did he ever put that in writing?
Yes. So there was a letter saying, no, we couldn't do this in the United States against someone who's not engaged in combat. And so Rand Paul said, okay, I win, yay me, I got something. But then a lot of other people said, no, wait a second, you didn't get what you think you got, because, you know, imminent threat isn't the only phrase in the English language that the administration has been torturing. Another phrase that they've been torturing is engaged in combat. So, you know, you think engaged in combat is like somebody with a gun and they're firing, they're about to fire. But the administration has in Afghanistan targeted people who are drug traffickers, or you know, they say are drug traffickers, or are drug financiers, on the grounds that these people are providing money to people who are engaged in combat. This has never been accepted in international law, that you can hit somebody because they're indirectly related, you know, they themselves are not carrying a gun, but they're related, you know, they're helping somebody else that's carrying a gun. That's never existed in international law. So there was an op-ed from a professor of the New York professor of law in the New York Times saying, no, not so fast, because this category engaged in combat is also elastic. And so you could be hit in a coffee shop, you know, if you're a financier. So then even that story is not finished yet.
All right,
Getting to the end.
Okay, let's do it. Let me just real quickly, this was sponsored by Veterans for Peace, Catholic Peace Ministry, Physicians for Social Responsibility, American Friends Service Committee, Methodist Federation for Social Action, Clarion Alliance, Sisters of St. Francis of Duke, Peace and Justice Center of Cedar Valley, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Iowa Peace Network, Sisters of Charity, BBM Leadership Team, Clinton Franciscan Center for Active Nonviolence and Peacemaking, and Des Moines Catholic Worker, which was also amazing, as always, at the demonstration today. Last thing I will say is May 10th, Rand Paul happens to be in Iowa. He will be in Cedar Rapids at the Kirkwood Motel Friday, May 10th for a huge Republican, let's see if you have enough money to buy a politician, event at Kirkwood Motel in Cedar Rapids. I don't know if it's $600 or $700 a plate or whatever, but it is free, I assume, to be outside of that event talking about drones, especially having Rand Paul there at the keynote could create a lot of stir, and perhaps the subpoena issue may be a real good one for Grassley and others as they enter. So we're going to be in discussion, especially with Eastern Iowa, on that event. And also, as Kathleen wanted me to mention, this is the first of many things. We'll definitely be talking to people about very soon going into Grassley's office and also going back into Harkin's office on these particular issues, especially subpoenas. So thank everybody for being here, and once again,
Along with that, I have to say, this came out of collective effort, and we're hoping some people here and using your name so that the invitation would like to be part of planning the next collective action. And we think we need to grow it, and hopefully we're part of it.
thank you, everybody. Give yourself another hand.
Just trying to get a close-up of the website addresses on this paper, but
I enjoy
this concludes this broadcast tonight, and come back with something later on, and I'll see you on the stream.